one of the earliest memories I have of living on Saxon Woods Road was playing in the snow
Huh.
in the front yard. So interesting. Um, I'm a little petite, as they say. So I'm not even 5 feet.
Mhm.
So I'm 4'6". So you can imagine what it was like. We had those big snowstorms, and we're out playing in the snow. I'm in a snowsuit, you know, not necessarily saying the snow was over my head, but by the same token, I can remember struggling and trying to keep up with the others,
Mhm.
even though I was the oldest.
Huh. And who were the others? Who were you
Well, my
playing with?
brothers,
Okay.
I had I have I had four brothers, one's deceased. But my brother Jerry, and then my brother Artie, and Jerry, who was 18 months younger than I mean, he was the one. I'm like, I'm the oldest, so I should always have the English racers first. I should always be the first in everything. Because of my size, I couldn't be the first because it didn't fit me. So, I would try to keep up with him. But other than that, because, there were um, kids on the street older than us. Of course, I wanted to be out on the golf course playing with them in the sleigh riding or wherever, or in the front yard playing. So that's what I mean by keeping up with the others. So it was a little more difficult than that, but I survived.
Yeah.
I was tough.
Yeah. And Sharon Pitt was your age, right?
Yes.
Did you?
Um, yes, Sharon was my age. When we first moved there, Sharon was living with her grandmother, who was about, oh, maybe 5 doors from us. Later, she moved right next door to us. So
Okay.
Sharon and I were in school together, which means by the time I started out, let's say, at the Little Red Schoolhouse in first grade. And I remember us sleeping on take our naps. We had little pallets, like we lie down and take our naps. And so that meant my brother Jerry, who was a year behind me in school, he was there in kindergarten. And so we'd all take naps. Um, Interesting enough, I really don't remember Sharon until we got older, even though she lived on the street. But that's the way it was. Yeah. So yes, Sharon was on the street with me, and because our street, Saxon Woods, was divided, part of us went to Quaker Ridge, and the others went to Heathcote. So it would have been Sharon, my brother Jerry, and I would have been in school together at Quaker Ridge, and Denise and Shelley Moore. Well, actually, not Denise. It was Denise and Shelley were down the street, and they went to Heathcote. So that was division. So even though I knew Shelley and I knew Denise, we didn't interact as much until we got older with Shelley and I anyway, because of going to different elementary schools.
Right. Huh.
And in those days, Quaker Ridge was the only elementary school, if I remember correctly, that had a hot lunch program.
Hmm.
So we ate lunch at school,
Ah.
whereas Quaker Ridge, Heathcote and Green Acres, others, those kids went home for lunch, and we didn't.
That's really interesting. Huh. How was the lunch? Do you remember liking it?
Well, let's put it this way: you can have either to have what the cafeteria prepared, you prepared your for yourself. Well, I was a very picky eater and still am,
Okay.
and the story goes that I could kind of caught up in one thing. My favorite lunch was peanut butter and jelly. Don't offer anything else. I didn't want chicken salad, tuna, bologna was popular in those days, peanut butter and jelly. And mother would always tell the story that she got received a call one day at home because they were concerned that my parents couldn't afford to give us more than what we were eating. And they never thought about what my brother Jerry was eating. They were concerned about what I was eating. And mother said to them, they offered me to provide free lunch. And mother said to them, if you can get that child anything else other than peanut butter and jelly, please be my guest. That's all she will eat. And I'm that way today.
Yeah.
So I guess the lunch was good. If they had something I liked, because they did print the menu, then I would eat it. But otherwise, it was peanut butter and jelly.
And how did you get to school? Bus, walk?
No, we took the bus to school.
Okay.
And the interesting part about that is Saxon Woods Road was and is still somewhat rather narrow and curvy. And so the bus used to stop what they call the Legs House. So the Legs had a big driveway area that can turn around. I mean, if I don't know if this comes out in George's interview or not, but he was talking about with the animals, what have you. So the bus would stop there, and we would have to walk from our house up to the Legs, which means we were walking on a curvy, narrow road. And mother called the school about it, and the school said it was too dangerous for the bus to drive down to pick us up. And mother told them it was too dangerous for the bus to drive down and pick us up. Evidently, it was too dangerous for us to walk.
Right.
Well, after that, the bus started picking up us in the front of the house.
Oh.
And I don't know how long it took because, I was a child. What
Right.
anything to me? I got on the bus. Well, I was told had to get on the bus. So, but that is what changed the bus route on Saxon Woods Road. So now anyone who has children that go to Quaker Ridge, the buses stop in front of our houses.
Oh, okay. It makes a lot of sense. I know they widened that road, but it's not a walking road.
No.
Now.
And understand, there's a lot more traffic today than it was when we were growing up, but still it was the idea. How can a bus road be too narrow for a bus and unsafe for the bus,
Right.
but safe for first graders
Yeah.
and second graders to walk?
Mm-hmm. And did you interact much with the 6 other houses right next to you, with the people who lived there? The extended
Yes,
family?
we did. In Black families especially, suddenly you have all these surrogate aunts and surrogate grandmothers, and the Pitts and the Petersons became our surrogates, and so the Johnsons. So the 2 very tiny houses that sit to the right of where we grew up, when they were built, it was built on one lot, and they were built for 2 sisters. So they split the lot and built the 2 houses. Never thought about what would have happened if they had to sell those houses now.
Right.
But there. So Granny lived in the second one from us. And so she became Granny to us. That was Mrs. Johnson. And then, her daughter was Aunt Lily. And so that's how that was. And then down the street, it was Grandma Pitt, who was Sharon's actual grandmother. So, that's the way it was. And as we grew up, it was Aunt so-and-so or, Uncle this one, that one. But that's part of our culture.
That's so nice. It's not the way I grew up on my street, or anything like that. And that seems really, really nice.
Well, to compound it, because part of it too, I imagine, which probably kind of really reinforced that for us is we were here. It was my father's 2 brothers lived in New Rochelle, and we lived in Scarsdale. Well, that was all our family.
All right. Yeah.
So we didn't have grandparents close by. Grandparents are still in North Carolina on both sides of the other family. So we didn't have any other family here, but those 2 uncles and their wives who lived in New Rochelle. So then you find your support system. And so we made that our support system.
Do you recall anything, like either any parties or going over to one of their houses for a snack or something like that? Like what might that be?
Well, we would go by, we'd probably be at Granny's house almost every day after school. Both of my parents worked. My mother taught school. When we first moved to Scarsdale, Daddy was working for the county as a toll collector. Later, he decided to do his own business, do catering. And then eventually he went to Shell Oil Company as procurement officer. And then he retired from Chase Bank. But in those years, because our parents were working, Granny was where I remember going there after school. So, that was, we get off our bus and we walk 2 houses. But then for a while too, my parents as so many Blacks did, brought others up from the South to help give them the opportunities that they may not have gotten in the very rural communities where my parents grew up. So we always had someone, not always, a good deal of the time, we had someone else living with us who oftentimes became my surrogate sister because I didn't have any sisters and I so desperately wanted a sister.
Mm.
So they would be older and they became the ones who helped us, who took care of us. And in exchange, mom and dad gave them room and board and helped them get through school, whether it was beauty culture, secretarial school, 2-year college, whatever it is they wanted to do, that was the exchange and with the extended family function.
Mm.
So, we also had someone older who would have finished high school.
Right.
And then, yes.
Then came on up. Huh. Really neat. So what was school like for you?
It's interesting because oftentimes I reflect on what it was like going to school. When we were at Quaker Ridge, there were 3 Black students in Quaker Ridge. Sharon, my brother Jerry, and I, an entire school. Later on, my parents had 2 additional children, Mark and George, and they went to the school. But I'm 10 years older than we call them the boys. Will be Mark and George because of the difference in age. So it was Jerry, Sharon, and I, and then my brother Artie, who's like 5 years my junior, was at Quaker Ridge. School was school. Did I really notice any real differences? I think unconsciously I did, but consciously as a child, I didn't. We did all the parties, at least the ones that we knew about. We attended all the school activities, participated in anything that came along. In fact, my brother and Jerry and I won't say we represented Scarsdale, but we were both very good athletes. And so we did gymnastic exhibitions throughout the state.
Oh.
And I think our instructor was Mr. Isaac Connie. He had been an Olympian that they brought to Scarsdale. And we worked with him, and the 3 of us would travel and do gymnastics exhibitions throughout the state. So the experiences you think about were phenomenal. The interaction with different people were phenomenal. I did have a little trick. I didn't like French. I wasn't very good at French. And why they made us take French, I don't know. I guess in retrospect I do. But at that time in my life, it's like, why do I need French? I just didn't know how to speak English. So I had severe nosebleeds. And if we went to class and I decided that this was getting more than what I wanted to deal with, I would just simply go like this. And my nose would start to bleed. And of course, everybody would panic. The teacher would panic. They send me down to the nurse's office. And I go to the nurse's office and I'd be just so distraught, having this horrible nosebleed. And I watched the time. And about 2 or 3 minutes before class was over, I'd stop my nose from bleeding. No one, not even my parents, ever caught on to it. Never.
It's a great trick.
Yes. So needless to say, I did somewhere or another manage to pass French. Don't know how.
Yeah.
But, as I say, as a child, you do what you got to do.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I did.
Kids always figure it out.
Yes. But other than that, like I said, school was good. I was, as opposed to my brother Jerry and my brother Artie and George, I didn't have the grades that they had. I was a very good athlete, though. I didn't have the grades. And I'm not sure if I didn't have the grades because of, obviously not because I wasn't bright enough. Later to find out I was really far brighter than what I thought I was. Um, but maybe there was just something going on where I was not receptive to the learning environment
Mm,
that was there. Um, because later on I find out, I'm really kind of smart.
right.
And you find this out later on in life.
Do you think
But
there could have been a role of expectations as you were a girl in that era? I don't know if that's possible.
I don't know if there was that or if it could have been now I would say it could have been some of the racial issues.
Mm,
Now I will say this, as a child, I did not know what racism was. I did not recognize it. I did not feel it. I did not feel rejected by anyone in Scarsdale based on my race. Scarsdale I would say I'm not sure this still is, was a community that had a certain level of dignity to it. So as I reflect on as a child, I suspect if someone did not like us because we were Black, what they did was they just didn't interact with us.
mhm,
But it wasn't overt.
right.
Okay. So, like I said, I went to all the bar mitzvahs, all the box mitzvahs. If I wasn't invited, it was just like, well, now why didn't I get invited to that one?
Mhm.
But never thought any other thing about the fact that, well, I guess, that wasn't really my best friend type thing. But we did the sleepovers, we did the parties, and I did the sleepovers and I did the parties. Never thought anything else about it.
Nice.
So I don't know if that's good, but I will tell you this: that was elementary. But as a girl, and my children went through Scarsdale schools. As a girl, we often talk about the family talks about the difference between being a female in Scarsdale, a Black female, and being a Black male in Scarsdale.
Uh-huh.
Because as you get to high school, sports become so much more as important as your grades in some respect. Okay. So my brothers in many respect were, and of course, still a different time when my younger brothers came along, where I think were accepted differently than what we were as girls. So I think that had somewhat of an impact on what went on and how I felt accepted. Because my friends were still my friends from Quaker Ridge.
Hmm.
So I think that did have something impact. Um, and again, maybe I was too quiet and shy and didn't speak out. Now I just talk all the time. Um, but other than that, I will say this though. Once I did get to high school, which I didn't understand, I was confronted with racism. I think I'm sure my parents understood it. I didn't.
Mm,
And if you listen to my brother's interview, he talked about how guidance counselors and teachers have such an impact on what you do and how you progress in school and where you go further. He and I had the same guidance counselor. Yes,
mm.
right. So I was told that I would be lucky enough if I graduated high school and did 2-year college. Literally, that's what was said to my parents. And so that was the expectation. That was all if I was lucky, I'd get through that. Well, when I received my master's from Fordham with honors, mother decided, well, maybe it's time for me to go back and say, maybe you were wrong.
Oh,
But and I won't necessarily call a name, but I tell you, I think everybody knows who I'm making reference to. But that was the time that when my children came along and went through high school, Nisha said she felt a difference, my daughter, than from my son.
hmm.
And again, he was a star athlete. He had good grades, but it was the same thing. And so I think in those times, even though much came much later, there was a difference. And when I was growing up, you think about the number of Blacks in Scarsdale. I think when I was growing up, it was just us. It was those of us who lived on Saxon Woods Road, and that was it. In fact, my mother would tell the story that when my brother Mark, I think was who was born, he's the second to youngest, she had him at school one day, and I think it was one of his best friends now looked at his mother and said, "Oh, Mommy, a brown baby." Because all people of our hue they'd ever seen were adults as maids or chauffeurs, and never thought about that there were blacks that blacks were also infants and children. So
That's really wild.
yes, but I will say, saying all of that, there were growing up in Scarsdale was really a good experience, um, because we were around and interacted with people in the high echelons of society. We had, or I would say I had, I'm sure my brothers the same way, and I know they are, no fear,
Mm.
no concern, no insecurities of when you get into the so-called white world of what was expected or how to behave. It was normal.
Mm.
And if someone said a name like, well, Liza Minnelli, we could say, oh yeah, we were in school with her. She came 2 years after us. It was like, no big thing.
Right.
Yeah. And Henry Kissinger said, oh yeah. And that's how we dismissed it because that was the norm.
Right.
I'll share a story. Many years later, I used to work for United Methodist Church, and we had a luncheon one day with a few of us were invited to lunch with Jesse Jackson. So I invited a friend of mine who's a black guy, grew up in Harlem, and I said to him, Jimmy, come have lunch with me and Jesse. He was like, are you serious? Stunned, did not know how to behave. Where for me, it's like, oh, okay, but that was the experience. So where some people may think there were some negatives, there were definitely positives.
When it's interesting because I think the exact same thought went through my mind when I heard George speak about how it seems like what your parents wanted to happen in Scarsdale happened. That you got the boost that you wouldn't have got if they stayed down in North Carolina.
Um, in another sort of way. Now, my parents, both my mother's side of the family and my father's side of the family in North Carolina, were seen as the elites of their community.
Hmm.
My mother's parents, on my maternal side, were all college educated.
Right. A lot of teachers.
Yes, see, my mother finished college. My dad, well, he actually finished, but never got his degree. That 2 weeks time that George mentioned. Um, their brothers and sisters all attended college. Their grandparents, my grandparents' siblings all attended college on my mother's side. On my father's side, his grandmother went to Elizabeth City, I think it is, a HBCU in North Carolina. So they were seen as the elites, and they taught school. My grandmother and my grandfather were both school teachers. So in many respects, they were then the elites. The difference is we interacted in another world.
Yeah.
So, I guess in some respects, yeah. But mother often said later on she wished we had lived in New Rochelle and not Scarsdale,
Hmm.
so that we could have had a more diverse community around us as children than what we had living in Scarsdale. But I always told her, Mom, we did well. Don't worry about it. We had advantages that we probably would not have had in New Rochelle.
And,
And the people you would have wanted us to interact with in New Rochelle, we interact with them anyway because that was your social circle.
and
So
so
it
how
was
did you how was that social circle formed?
Well, the one in New Rochelle was that my parents were active in the civil rights movement. My mother was a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, which is a historically black women's sorority. And so they were just involved in that, and involved in the ACP and the Urban League. Mama taught in what they call the underground school during the Lincoln Avenue school desegregation, when they were doing the riots in New Rochelle at that time. In order to make sure that the kids did not lose anything, they had school after school.
Ah.
So mother was involved in that. Daddy, on the hand, wasn't teaching, but he was involved in the other aspects of it. And both of his brothers were very active in the politics of New Rochelle, one more so than the other, in New Rochelle, and therefore in Westchester County. So that's how the social circle grew. You know, you're in church, and we went to church for a while in New Rochelle, so that helped, build that circle.
And then, you mentioned the the discussion with your mom about Scarsdale, and then you chose to raise your kids in Scarsdale.
Yes, I did.
So what was going through your mind as that time approached, and you're trying to think, am I going to continue on here or go somewhere else?
Well, actually, I didn't finish high school in Scarsdale. I chose. I'll try to shorten the story. I chose to do my last 2 years of high school in North Carolina.
That's why I couldn't find you in the yearbook.
So the reason was, my cousin came up to spend the summer, and she made it sound so enticing with all the parties and the football games that they did. I just begged my parents to please let me go and live with my mother's sister so I could have that experience. And Mama said in the summer, she said, finally, she gave in. I just had to go. I had to go. Well, part of it I had to go was because my friends were a lot of my friends were older than I, and a lot of my friends were from White Plains, and everybody was graduating and leaving me, and I didn't want to be here by myself. So they agreed to let me go. So I went to North Carolina. So I did school down, finished high school there, did undergrad there, married there, had my children there. And when I divorced my husband, I had to decide where I was going to live. And even though I had a lot of family and friends there, I felt the best place for the three of us was to come back. So I came back to New York, there by Scarsdale.
And what was it like going down to North Carolina, coming from Scarsdale? Had you had enough interaction with people from there that it was a smooth transition, or not so much?
Let me tell you, total shock.
Oh boy.
I'm like, oh my God, they're Black people. I'd never been around this many Black people in my life. I mean, literally, it was like a rude awakening for me. I loved every minute of it. I flourished. I probably went from a C minus student to an AA plus student. I was in the popular group. So it was absolutely, for me, it was great. I went to undergrad, same way, finished honors at my undergrad. So for me, it was a really good experience. Now, share a little story with you how ignorance plays into this. When I was in high school, on Saturdays, we take the bus downtown, get off the bus, and we shop. Well, I didn't really like to shop with a lot of the kids. I was kind of a loner in some respects too. So I was shopping by myself. So I walked in a store called Montaldo's. Montaldo's was the Neiman Marcus of the South. And I walked into Montaldo's. When you go into Montaldo's, it had a Black woman at the door with her white gloves on, and they would open the door and admit you. So I walked in, I say hi, and I go in, and all these people are looking at me. And I'm saying, gee, they must not be accustomed to teenagers coming in here. And I did what I was going to do, and I left out. And then mind you, this was in the 60s, 66, 67. And I left, and about 10 years later, I was telling someone this story, and they said to me, Helen, didn't you realize it wasn't because you were a teenager? Black didn't shop at Mount Aldo's. I said, oh, I didn't realize that. Ignorance
Yeah.
is bliss.
Yeah. Oh, really funny. So when you came back, how old were your kids?
My kids were in elementary school. So that's why they went through Quaker Ridge. Then they went through the junior high. Because by that time, the Little Red Schoolhouse was, I think, had been turned into part of the golf course.
Right.
And they went through Quaker Ridge and the junior high and high school.
And
So that meant there and now had been 2 generations. And even though I'm Daniels by marriage, still seen as a Parnell. So that meant that was the 2nd generation of Parnells that went through the school. And they had a lot of the same teachers
Oh,
who were still there, a number of them. And then, of course, some of the teachers from, were friends, personal friends of my parents and what have you. So, knew them. And so it was, I mean, like they both say, for them, the same thing. It gave them an air of security that they may not have had they gone to another school.
right.
So it was good.
Very cool. It's a very interesting and nuanced issue, having to, you can't have everything.
No, you can't.
Can't. Let me think what else. When you went down south, did you feel like Scarsdale schools had really prepared you well for that? Like you were a cut above the other kids?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, the educational process of Scarsdale was and still is phenomenal.
Yeah.
What I was doing and probably in maybe junior high and 9th grade, whatever it was, they were not where I was. And I think that was one of the things to help, because it was like a lot of stuff was I'd already had, had been exposed to it, and then exposed to a lot that they had not been exposed to, which enabled me then to be able to share my experiences in an environment that I probably not have shared before. So yes, Scarsdale, I would tell anybody, can you go wrong raising your child in Scarsdale? As far as the school system is concerned, probably not.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a better education.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get out of it what you put in it, not always. But yes, my children are very comfortable. They were pleased, and I have never heard one of them say either one of them say that they didn't enjoy their experience of going through. And there were ups and downs like anybody else, but yes.
When you were raising them and watching what they went through, did it seem like times had changed a lot? Or did they have
by the time they reached, they were in school, there were a few more Black families. So in that regard, they had that kind of a little different experience than what I had. I'm not sure there were more in Quaker Ridge, but there were more in Scarsdale in general. So by the time they reached the junior high school, there were more Blacks to interact with it. But Jody and Nisha both say, or Joseph, as you call him now, they pretty much enjoyed. I mean, you exposed, like George would say, you did ice skating, you skied, you traveled, you did all the parties, you learned about different religions, you interacted with different cultures. I mean, George spoke to the South African embassy being next door to us, one of the, so you have a chance to explore and learn about different people and how they live.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think it makes you more accepting, because you learn about diversity, you learn to respect it. So, yeah, that's it. About it.
Yeah. Were you involved as a mom in the PTA or anything like that?
Oh, most definitely. I believe my philosophy as a parent was whatever my children were doing at that age, I need to do the parental piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I participated with the PTA, and they did whatever they're baking and bus trips. I let me go on and be one of the chaperones. And I made sure any job that I worked, they understood that my children were my priority. I need the job in order to care for them, but they were a priority.
Right.
So I was going to take time off to do whatever I need to do to make sure they had a well-rounded education. Soccer on Saturday mornings, trying to get from one field to the other field when they were playing. They're 4 years difference, but still, trying to do that. My son, was in like all county and all state wrestling, all that kind of stuff. So I make sure that we were up and dressed, and whenever wherever his game or activity was at that point in time. So yes, very much involved. And we even had a single moms group at that time
Oh,
in Scarsdale.
that's interesting. So what was that
Yes.
like?
Oh, that was most interesting because it was interesting listening to some of the women complain about how limited their child support was. It's like, well, I only get like 50,000 or 100,000 a young one. Okay, I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Yeah.
so it's interesting those comparisons. But we were a support group for one another. So and believe it or not, it wasn't just Quaker Ridge. This is a support group from all the school districts.
Mm-hmm.
East Coast, Green Acres, Quaker Ridge, all of us got together. So it just wasn't one group from one because Scarsdale, is divided by elementary schools. That's really where you're from. Where you're from, Quaker Ridge.
Right.
Not Scarsdale, Quaker Ridge.
Right.
So yes.
No single dads though.
No. Oh, I don't know if they had them or not, but I know we had a single mothers group. And we would meet at one another's homes, and it was an interesting experience.
For sure. When did your children graduate?
Let's see. Now I'm bad with numbers now. Had to be in let me see, I bought my house in Harlem in 86. So it was around 80, in the late 80s, they were graduating, 89.
Okay.
90.
And did you leave Scarsdale after they graduated the school?
In 86, I bought a house in Harlem.
Okay. Which
was another interesting experience.
Yeah.
And stayed there until my parents, got to the point that they needed help. And then I moved back to Scarsdale to take care of them.
Okay.
But, yes. Mm-hmm.
Huh. How was Harlem for you?
Loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it. I mean, it was at the height of the crack epidemic, but it was the most interesting experience. The politics of Harlem was very interesting. And, there was that social life, and Harlem has a life and a heartbeat of its own. And so, I became very involved in that. And so did my daughter didn't, but my son did. Joe became very involved in the Harlem politics, which then pulled my parents back in because they had some friends and what have you in Harlem. Because there was a time when I don't really remember it because I was a child, but my father particularly would go into Harlem and meet, and there would be Dr. Ben was be there, Kenneth Clark, they would get together on, I guess, Saturdays or Sunday afternoons as men and talk about the problems of the world and how it impacts people. Wow. So my father was very much involved in that so-called movement. And so he would, to him, we didn't live in Scarsdale. In fact, they were a little concerned when I decided to move to Scarsdale. Move to Harlem.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were like, "Are you sure it's a good idea? I'll be all right." So going back for them, it was good too, because I then involved them in some of the things that I was doing, some of the political activities that I was involved in.
That has to be real a nice rejuvenation to be getting back into that for them.
Yes.
I would think.
Yes. So interesting. This interview is about what was it like being growing up Black in Scarsdale.
Right.
Growing up Black, taking it back to that, growing up Black in Scarsdale probably enabled me to do some of the things I did in Harlem
How so?
because it gave me the sense of security that I could speak out,
Yeah.
that I had a voice, that being a female was not going to hold me back. You know, so and watching my parents do what they did to ensure that we had not only a good education, but we had a good experience in Scarsdale. You know, how they became involved in activities in Scarsdale that helped us integrate in the community in a different sort of way. So we became of the community, not just
Hmm.
in the community.
You did Girl Scouts, right?
Oh, I did Girl Scouts for years. I also danced.
Oh yeah, you ballet, right?
I did ballet and I did modern jazz and um, the school that I went to also was a feeder school for New York Ballet. And they would come each fall and have us audition for the Nutcracker.
Hmm.
Well, I was never chosen. I didn't understand why. I mean, because I knew I was a pretty good dancer.
Right.
But in those days, they didn't have Black ballerinas. And also, not only did I not fit the stereotype because of my race, I had an athletic build,
Hmm.
you know. So even though I did toe and all that, but I was much better at jazz and modern.
Hmm.
But I still had to go. I still studied. I studied on the Royal Academy. So I still had to take my exam, whatever. But I had the opportunity to meet Alvin Ailey and to work with him through my dancing.
Wow. Is
Yeah,
it good? Is it good as a dancer to be short? I don't know. Or does it not matter?
it's good as a dancer to be slim.
Okay.
And even though I was not heavy, I was not fat or anything like that. I was not as slim. And especially with ballet, the ballet shoes are cut very, very narrow. The toe for point cut very, very narrow. And they were cut too narrow for my foot. And even though I would manage, it was still painful.
Hmm.
And so I kept saying, I don't really want to do toe, but
Yeah.
that was part of the curriculum, so, I did it for a while and then, eventually I stopped, but I did more modern and jazz.
Right. And this was the dance classes were in Scarsdale for modern and jazz.
Yes,
Wow.
yes. Now, I had the opportunity to go to Juilliard and I said no, because that would have meant I would have had to travel on the train by myself to the city.
Yeah.
I was brave, but not that brave.
And that's a pretty significant time commitment as well.
Yes, and I imagine, today I've watched kids on the train who are traveling back and forth to Juilliard or who are in Broadway shows traveling by themselves in their teens, and I said, they're really good. I didn't have the nerve to do that at that point in time in my life.
Yeah. Hmm.
Do I regret it? Not really.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Talking about making friendships, 2 years ago we had what we called a kindergarten reunion.
Oh.
Yes. There are a group of us who went to Quaker Ridge. I didn't finish high school for them, but most of them finished Scarsdale High. And we had a reunion.
And how was it?
It was it was actually phenomenal. 'Cause I still keep in touch with a lot of my friends from high school. And it was very interesting to play catch up and to say, oh, have you heard Mr. Sloan lately? What happened to Mr. Sloan? And, what happened to Miss Little and all that kind of stuff. But it was really interesting. But like I said, I think that if one had an opportunity, regardless of what your race is, to have a child go through the Scarsdale schools and live in Scarsdale is probably a good experience, especially if you are secure in who you are.
Right.
And thankfully, we had parents who, growing up in their lifetimes, who probably had opportunities that many other Blacks in their lifetime did not have, which enabled them to pass that sense of who we are, of self, onto us.
Right.
You know, not very many Blacks did college or had parents who had gone to college. Think about it. I think we're on our 5th generation of college now.
Yeah.
That's not the norm for families, whether you're Black, white, yellow, doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You know? And my mother was the first Black teacher in Tarrytown. So when when your children see you doing those kinds of things, it gives them a sense of who they are and
Right.
what they can achieve.
All right, Helen, it was
Thanks.
great. It was great talking to you. I'll be in touch.
You too. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.